Good morning. A packed house at 8 o'clock in the morning. This is impressive. And now I feel obligated to make sure this is fun and interesting. My goodness. Well, this morning, the Arkansas Policy Panel is releasing a new report called Right for Reform, Arkansas as a Model for Social Change. And that report is available at Public Policy Panel's website, which is arpanel.org. arpanel.org. So what we're going to do here is have a discussion about that report that's available at AARP, AARP panel, ARpanel, right, .org. I was thinking AARP. Why? I don't know, but okay. arpanel.org. So what we're going to do is the format for this is Dr. Jay Barth, who is the ME and EMA Grace Peace Professor of Politics and Director of Civic Engagement at Hendrix College. He's going to talk with us about the report, more or less present the report to us. And what the report argues is that Arkansas, the state of Arkansas, is not just ripe for reform, but we have a long history of reform, a momentum for reform, and a place where our reform is actually a model that other states, similar to ours in being rural and small, but even larger states could model. That other states can replicate, is what I'm trying to say. The policy progress that the state of Arkansas has made in healthcare reform, education, preschool, juvenile justice, you name it, we have done and we have made strides in public policy that serves all Arkansans, but particularly the disadvantaged Arkansans. And for a state that is trying to fight poverty, raise its data around being second or third in the nation, depending upon how you view the 2010 census, in poverty, we are actually doing some excellent work in getting us to not being in the bottom 5, but actually being in the top 5. And if nothing else, being in the top 5 for the progressiveness, the swiftness, and the ways in which we've addressed poverty in our state. So Jay is going to talk a bit about that report, that also, not just in the policy sense, but how Republicans and Democrats in our state have actually worked together on a progressive movement. But that movement could be in jeopardy if we don't keep our momentum going, and if we, as citizens, don't continue to mobilize and galvanize around these important issues. So Jay is going to talk with us about our policy, how we're right for reform, and a national model and a state that you can invest in for social change. After Jay's presentation, then we will have Rex Nelson, Senators Joyce Elliot and Darrin Williams will come and have remarks or, well, not just remarks, but reflection. I'm trying to say provocative. But I was trying to find a nice word for it, but provocative discussion about what is in that report and challenging what's in that report, not so much in the sense of its rightness or wrongness, but what more we need to do to keep our social change movement going. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, and then I'll come back and ask the panelists to come up.
Thanks, Sharice. Thank you all for being here. I'm not used to talking this early in the morning. I've never taught a class before 10 a.m. in my life. So this is the earliest I've ever done anything like this. This has been a really great process to work on. I want to thank the Arkansas Public Policy Panel and the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation for allowing me to do what I love most, which is think about where Arkansas is, think about how we got to where we are, and to think about where Arkansas is heading. And I think we, as Sharice suggested in her opening comments, there's a big question about where Arkansas is heading. Are we heading in the continued positive direction of creating slowly real progress that affects people's daily lives in a very positive direction? And that is a model for other places in the country, as I'll talk about in more detail in a bit. Are we headed in a direction in which we have a more polarized politics that leads to impasses and that leads to disenchantment and disempowerment on the part of Arkansas's people? We're at a real crucial moment in Arkansas's politics and policy making, and that's the big point, one of the big points of this report. Now, folks around the country, when they think about recent Arkansas politics, they probably think about some version of this map. And this is a map that many of you probably know. This is a map from the New York Times just a couple of days after the 2008 presidential election. And it shows Arkansas as the buckle in this belt of counties running through the middle of the country in which there was deep disenchantment with President Obama. These are the counties in which John McCain did better than George W. Bush had 4 years earlier, and obviously in dramatic disconnect with the rest of the country. But I think that while this map is real, because Arkansans have found themselves out of sync with this president, Arkansas residents have rejected a lot of Democratic presidents emphatically, whose name was not Bill Clinton, in the last 30 years. But there is an especial disconnect with Barack Obama. I think that is unquestioned, that is real. But there are other maps that show a very different Arkansas that is just as real, in that on a variety of public policy issues, Arkansas in this last generation has made tremendous moves forward, tremendous advances, and as Cherise suggested, this has been done with Republican leadership and Democratic leadership. A moderate politics in which progressives have a place at the table. They don't necessarily sit at the head of the table, they have a place at the table, and they have been able to move the state forward in a variety of ways, in a consistent way. We start, of course, with the grand story of education in Arkansas, and I think this has been a generation of dramatic education reform. Obviously, the court's involvement in the Lakeview case is a crucial piece of this. We see, of course, on the input side, dramatic changes in Arkansas's spending on public education, in its investment in quality pre-K, in a really important way, and you see that it is not just expansive pre-K that covers most poor children in the state, but it is high-quality pre-K, and we know how crucial good pre-K is in terms of getting our young people off to a good start and ready for school. It is, of course, an investment in teacher salary, something that Arkansas had always lagged dramatically behind, but now is a leader in this region of the country, therefore making teaching a much more viable option for folks as they think about their profession. But we're all not just seeing movement on the input side, we're now seeing movement on the output side, as that these investments are paying off. For years now, Education Week's quality counts indicators have consistently ranked Arkansas as one of the best states overall in terms of our education quality, and certainly the best in the sub-region of which Arkansas is a part. And while test scores are not the only thing that matters, we certainly are also seeing new progress on test scores such as the so-called America's Report Card, the NAEP exam, as Arkansas is now increasingly, especially in the lower grades, now pretty much at the average of national testing on that very important test. And we are seeing some progress on some of the other indicators that matter so much in terms of educational outcomes. So we are seeing amazing progress in this area. But it's as distinctive as the education story has been, it's not alone, okay? We move to other areas of reform, such as health coverage. And obviously the Our Kids program is one in which our children in particular now have very high rates of health insurance coverage. The legislation passed during the last session, which cuts the red tape on Our Kids, is likely to move this number up even more. And so there is very good success here. And while we're talking about health insurance, I think it's also important, and health coverage, it's also important to think about the investment made in health care from our use of the tobacco settlement money last decade as well. A very wise decision, one of the best uses of that tobacco settlement money of any country, of any state in the country. But we also think about the way in which we have dealt with our fiscal situation over the last decade. Early in this decade, about a decade ago, of course, like most states, we faced the recession. Many states cut state services. Surrounding states slashed Medicaid. Arkansas made a different decision. We put a surcharge on our highest earning incomes for a short period of time that helped bridge that gap and helped keep Medicaid alive in its full form in Arkansas during that period. A very good, wise, progressive decision. In more recent years, as we rarely had a surplus, and actually Missouri and Tennessee are actually a little darker than they appear on that map. Arkansas is the only fully white map that indicates Arkansas had no deficit during 2011 fiscal year, or actually for the previous several years. The way in which we use that surplus also nudged Arkansas in a positive direction. We used much of that surplus to improve the school infrastructure in this state. We then, with the tax cuts that were made, tended to be more targeted tax cuts that tended to help the lowest income of Arkansans rather than tax cuts which benefited upper income Arkansans and corporations. And so smart decisions about our fiscal state and about using our comparative fiscal benefits to the benefit of Arkansans. And we could go through a long list of progressive victories during this period. Whether it is the minimum wage increase, which was passed while Governor Huckabee was governor, the complete elimination of payday lenders in the state, which I think is a crucially important story and contrasts so dramatically with other states around us. The creation of a state agriculture department to begin to create some more coherent agriculture policy in this state. The work on poverty that Senator Elliot has done, the work on criminal justice reform that Representative Williams has led the efforts of, juvenile justice reform that was mentioned earlier, the beginnings of severance tax reform as well. Lots of a story of success that is not just about education. As much as that story is important, it's a more full-fledged shift in positive reform in this state. I think it's also important to think about those who have traditionally been left behind in Arkansas's story, and that includes women and persons of color. And what we have seen in recent decades is, in fact, these folks, women as a group and African Americans as a group in Arkansas, have not, in some cases, have made advances, and in other cases not made the kind of back steps that we have seen in other states. The map on the left looks at the gender income gap. And this shows the percentage women's earnings as compared to men's earnings. So of course, we all know that throughout America, women's earnings lag behind men's earnings. But we look at Arkansas, and Arkansas is a state in which Arkansas women actually earn above 85 cents on the dollar compared to men. On the right, one of the important stories of this last decade is the fact that the income gap between whites and blacks has grown tremendously. It has grown in Arkansas, but only very minimally, and especially compared to other states, that income gap has not grown as much as it has elsewhere, creating a real backstep for African Americans as a group during this last decade. And it also, importantly and interestingly, folks who have traditionally been left outside of politics have gotten a place at the table in this modern Arkansas. Arkansas really stands out in terms of the percentage of women in the state legislature. And I think many of you who've been around for a while, this is big news, right? Women were traditionally pretty much absent from the most important governing bodies in the state. Arkansas now one of the leaders. In fact, in this subgroup, it is the highest percentage. Just over 22% of Arkansas's legislators are now women, larger than Texas or Mississippi, and larger than almost all other southern states. In addition to what has happened, this story of the last of this series of slides to date, it's also important to recognize what has not happened in Arkansas in recent decades. Is on those hot-button issues that so polarize and divide us, Arkansas and its legislative leaders and policymakers have tended to say, we're not going to get involved in that. We're not going to pass legislation that creates these kind of divisions in society. You know, this is the story of the passage of immigration laws in recent years. Arkansas has, in essence, said, we're not going to pass legislation that restricts immigration at the state level. We are going to wait for the federal government to take the step as it has historically done in the area of immigration. This is a big deal because Arkansas is really an exception in terms of new gateway states. When you look around the country, those states that are growing tremendously in terms of immigrant populations have tended to get very active on state policy issues. Obviously, Arizona, Alabama being the prototypes of that. Arkansas has gone a very different way. And it's particularly interesting that Arkansas has not done this because we do have a direct democracy, and we've certainly seen a direct democracy being a real instrument for limiting the rights of immigrants in states. But I think the failure of Secure Arkansas to succeed with getting a ballot measure on the ballot has been a very interesting story. It's not just immigration, but there are other hot-button issues. Arkansas has had some regulations of abortion, for instance, but certainly not the kind of focus on abortion and limiting of women's reproductive choices that we've seen in surrounding states. And with a couple of exceptions, of course, LGBT issues have not been the focus of the Arkansas legislative agenda the way that they have in other surrounding states like Tennessee to our east, for instance. And of course, those that have been passed have been shot down by the courts. Okay? So I think these polarizing social issues have generally been avoided, and the other issues have been dealt with in a moderate manner, led by both Democrats and Republicans, with progressives at the table, nudging us forward with reform. This has been the story of recent Arkansas politics, and it's a story that has been missed by folks who don't know this state very well, and I think arguably it's been missed by some folks in this room who do know this state very well, and that we get distracted by some of the other things going on, and we fail to see this pattern of real progress on these issues. So why? Why has Arkansas had this record of recent reform? And I think there are a handful of big issues, big reasons that help explain this. First off is a distinctive political history and political culture that differs from the states that surround us. Obviously, Arkansas, grounded in the power of the plantation system, especially in the eastern part of the state, certainly had a traditionalist culture in many ways, where social hierarchies mattered and where certain folks were lower on that hierarchy and did not have a place, did not have a voice in the politics of the state. But Arkansas had a couple of traditions that other states haven't had. One of those traditions was, beginning in the 1870s and 1880s, the beginnings of a populist movement that has never fully gone away. The thread of populism has run since that time through the Southern Tenant Farmers Union into more contemporary politics. Populism has had a voice, an ongoing voice in Arkansas that we see in kind of the drive for some of these policies that we've talked about. There is also in Arkansas, unlike other states, a libertarian streak, a get government out of our lives streak that is exceptional. We see it most clearly in the northwestern part of the state historically, but it is kind of a part of Arkansas life in general. And it comes out of the distinctive life experiences of folks who had to live on their own, who had to survive on their own, and who didn't really want government getting involved in their lives. And so we have those two traditions. Populism that says on economic issues in particular, we expect folks to take care of each other and we expect government to take care of each other. On other issues, when government's best left out of the business, let's keep government out of the business. And so those two strands, I think, are an important part of the Arkansas story that has allowed this reform to occur. Second, and this is, I think, a crucial point, the scale of the state is one that allows change to happen. Okay? This is a small place geographically. It actually is a place that feels even smaller than its geography. This is a place where people have deep, ongoing personal connections and personal relationships, and they can use those relationships to create change. This is a place where there is very easy access to elected officials if people make the choice to make those connections with elected officials. The picture, on the left, just a great example of this. These are young people advocating for passage of the DREAM Act to the state legislature, meeting with the governor. Those kinds of interactions happen on a regular basis here. That is not normal in state government, and it allows that kind of change to take place. The maps on the right actually, I think, provide a great example of the way in which grassroots folks interacting with their legislators can create social change. As many of you know, the state, there was a long battle for the development of a state Department of Agriculture. That was ultimately passed by one vote margin in the state House. That upper map is the votes for that piece of legislation. The darker color are those folks who ended up voting for the creation of a state Department of Agriculture. What's below is a map of the Citizens First Congress, which had that as their priority issue, where their organizations existed, where their local organizations existed. And you see the connection between where those groups were at work and where those legislators cast votes for that piece of legislation. And I'm a good enough social scientist to know that correlation is not always causation, but in this case, because they were focused on personal interactions with legislators, I think here's a great example of that actually working. That was a key cause of those legislators casting votes, because they knew that their fellow citizens, their neighbors, were watching them as they cast that vote. So scale matters. This is a place where change can occur. This is also a biggie. That the progressive organizations that exist in the state, unlike states around us, play well together. They are actually prone towards working in coalition rather than having turf battles. Okay? That's not true in all of our surrounding neighbor states. There are, in fact, a lot of turf battles. Here, that is rare. People know that they have to work together. I think there are some cultural elements to that. This is a place where people are pretty nice to each other in general. But I think that there is a real value in this. And we see here a variety of the coalitions that have come together in recent years on these progressive issues, both playing defense and offense, and have made a big difference working together. And I think that's an important thing. It's also important to think about the Arkansas-based foundations that have made important investments in these organizations and allowed them to sustain and grow, recognizing that they are going to work with others in creating that change. I think we also can't underestimate the importance of what has remained to date a depoliticized Arkansas court system. We know that in so many of our surrounding states, the battles for judicial elections have become deeply politicized with big money involved in ideological battles for control of the court. Today, that has not happened in Arkansas. That has left the court free in a way that they are not in other states to make the tough calls. I think it did help them stay engaged on education. It has helped them be more free to cast votes on civil rights issues such as LGBT, civil rights issues. I think that the depoliticization of the Arkansas judiciary, which we have, is something we shouldn't take for granted. It has been a very important force in the state in which the courts have remained, in many cases, a partner with progressives for social change rather than enemies of that change. And we need to protect this depoliticization of the judiciary at all costs as we move forward. All right, so why does this matter? Okay, got this little state in the middle of nowhere. Most people in America don't know where Arkansas is. So why is this story of progressive reform actually interesting outside of the walls of this state? Well, it's because Arkansas is not a single state. Arkansas, as we all know, is 6 states in one. And if you drive from Eureka Springs to the Delta, you've been in a lot of different states. You've been in a lot of different places, right? And this is relevant. And this map, if you focus on the Arkansas piece, begins to kind of map out these 6 different cultural traditions that are at work. If we start in the middle, we have an urban area, an urban county, Pulaski County, which is significant both in the legislative arena, of course, in the electoral arena. The counties that surround it, creating now almost a donut around Pulaski County, kind of classic suburban counties, mostly white counties that kind of spend time in that inner city. To the east, of course, the Delta, with its traditional focus on agriculture and its historic challenges when it comes to poverty and race relations. In the northwest, an area that is growing very fast, but with a cultural underpinnings of libertarianism and republicanism. And then we have rural counties running southwest to northeast. To the southwest, we have a clump of counties that really have cultural affinities with states to the southwest. In the northeast, counties that have cultural affinities to the states of the north and east. These counties running southwest to northeast, these rural counties, they still are very important in defining elections in this state and legislative outcomes in this state. Now, what we know through a whole series of research efforts in political science is that policy diffusion happens from places like the places that policy is moving towards. And so policy change in Arkansas can become a model for social change in other places like Arkansas. And as a result of the diversity of Arkansas, there are lots of other places like Arkansas, or parts of Arkansas, in that urban areas have some models in Pulaski County. Suburban areas, the counties around, and these other counties that are more rural have those same kind of parallels in areas outside of Arkansas. And because social change in Arkansas requires weaving together this intricate quilt of different geographies to create the social change, there can be lessons learned here that can be applied a lot of other places. And I think this is arguably the so what for people outside this state. And it ultimately becomes an argument for why some should invest in Arkansas to create change here, with an explicit and conscious notion of learning lessons that can be applied elsewhere in terms of this social change work. Okay? Now, undeniably, there are serious challenges to continued reform. This is not a Pollyannish report. This is a very real report. We cannot overlook the social divisions that divide Arkansans. Many of them grounded in history, especially race. We all know the power of those divisions in keeping us from working together rather than focusing on the way in which we are different. That is undeniable. Secondly, Arkansans don't really trust the value of coming together for social change. We have, in the words of Robert Putnam, something of a social capital deficit. We're not yet convinced as a people that this is going to pay off. And so we have obstacles to the formation of groups and maintenance of those groups. And any of you who have been involved with nonprofits in the state, you know what a challenge this is. People ultimately kind of say, is this really worth it? Is this really going to matter? I think that's a major issue in this state moving forward. These organizations that have done such good in this state are small organizations. They have limited resources. And in many ways, the state-based foundations are really maximized in terms of their efforts. There have to be some resources from outside the state if we are going to kind of continue to move forward and create this social change. And then finally, the thing that I think is arguably most relevant is that there is all kinds of evidence that we are moving towards a much more polarized kind of politics. And I think the last regular session of the legislature showed real hints of some of this polarization. And I think that we see in Arkansas a very different political story than the states are surrounding us. And this, I want to emphasize, is not so much about which party is in control of the legislature or the governorship. This is the kind of politics practiced by those folks in control. And I think is some evidence that we really are moving towards a much more polarized kind of politics. You know, Arkansas is the one state in the South that had a Democratic-controlled legislature in both houses at the start of the decade and maintains that control today. But it is a very moderate kind of politics, where again I come back to this point, where progressives have a voice, they aren't in leadership roles, but it is that kind of moderately progressive leadership that has moved the state forward on all these array of issues. I think that is under threat, and I think that that is why this is a really important time in this state's politics and policy making. So with that, that is my report, and we will move towards the panel. Thank y'all.
And I'd like to ask Rex Nelson, who is the former communications director for Governor Mike Huckabee, State Representative Darrin Williams, and State Senator Joyce Elliot to join us. So I want to start, and Rex, I'll start with you. I want to start with just your reactions to making a case that Arkansas is ripe for reform in just 2 minutes or less. What were some of your initial reactions? I know, right?
I can't even say my name in 2 minutes.
Because we have to end at 9:30, and I want to make sure, you know, he's one of my favorite bloggers, so I know that he can, you know, that he can go on if he needs to. But if you would, just give us your initial reactions to Arkansas being ripe for reform.
I think Jay laid it out perfectly in the strides that we have made in this state. I frankly think the key, and I'm not just saying this because former Governor and Senator David Pryor and Barbara, good to see you are here this morning, but I think the key is that we have had an amazing run of governors in this state since 1967. We have had a run of good governors. I would go to National Governors Association meetings and I would hear governors from other states speak and I would think, how on earth did he or she get elected? How are they a governor? And then I realized that I was really spoiled in this state, growing up with Dale Bumpers and Bill Clinton and Mike Huckabee, really world-class orators when you get to it. And then I look at somewhere where most people would say was culturally and from a progressive standpoint, if you go to other states ahead of Arkansas, but look at the run of governors that Illinois has had, for instance. Think about that. I read a great quote recently in the Chicago Tribune, which a legislator was talking about the corruption in Illinois politics. He said, you know, we're no better than Louisiana, just without the good food. So, you know, we've had this great run. So trying to get in my 2 minutes, I think we're ripe for reform, but I also think the 2014 gubernatorial election will be the most important election in Arkansas in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I mean that seriously, because we are a true two-party state for the first time in our lifetimes. If you look at the parity in the legislature we see now, and for the first time since 1966, we're going to go into a governor's race without either an incumbent in the race or a clear favorite. Now, there's some old-timers in here, but I'll do this real quickly. Run with me through the past real quickly. 2010, Mike Beebe was an incumbent. 2006, Mike Beebe was a clear favorite. 2002, 98, Huckabee was an incumbent both times. 94, Jim Guy Tucker ran as an incumbent. Bill Clinton an incumbent in 90. Bill Clinton an incumbent in 86. Bill Clinton an incumbent in 1984. Frank Whitey got beat but was an incumbent in 1982. Bill Clinton got beat but he was an incumbent in 1980. You go back to 1978, Bill Clinton, a clear favorite coming into the race. 1976, David Pryor ran as an incumbent. 1974, David Pryor was a clear favorite coming into the race as the time had ended for Orville Faubus and my friend Bob Riley was running against him also in the Democratic primary. 1972, Dale Bumpers an incumbent. 70, Winthrop Rockefeller an incumbent. 68, Winthrop Rockefeller, an incumbent. Go back to 1966, Justice Jim Johnson against Winthrop Rockefeller. That's the last time, it'll be 48 years by the 2014 election, the last time that we have had a gubernatorial election in this state without a clear favorite going in or an incumbent. We're ripe for reform, but we've got to elect a strong governor in 2014.
Wow, that's excellent. Yeah. So I want to get Senator Elliott's and Representative Williams's reactions, but I actually want to come back to leadership because that's an important piece. So Representative Williams, if I can ask you about your initial reactions and thoughts to Arkansas as a place ripe for reform.
Well, first, let me say thank you for inviting me here, and let me say that I had the pleasure of being at Hendricks with Jay. We went to school together. I'm not quite as smart as he is, but that was an outstanding presentation, and I think Jay hit the nail right on the head. I want to focus a little bit about the challenges that he talked about, and I think they are real. Senator Elliot and I talked about them this morning. We are, in the General Assembly, becoming much, much more polarized. It's no surprise to you all, but because you read about it, but living through it and being there, it is amazing when you see us not being able to pass a budget, for example, for the School for the Deaf, because it has a slight increase in funding, and that's almost completely along party lines. That's unusual. That's not traditional in this state, and it's becoming a real issue. You see right now we're in the middle of a physical session. Senator Elliott and I, we appreciate you all letting us be here because we'd rather be here than there. Right now, joint budget is meeting, and our joint budget meetings now last much longer than they have in the past. And my colleagues, Tiffany Rogers and Johnny Roebuck, I see them in the audience. Thank you all for being here.
So as a place that's ripe for reform, in terms of the challenges, how do the challenges make it a place ripe for reform? Or maybe not. Maybe you're saying that those challenges are insurmountable and...
No, Sharice, I don't think they're insurmountable, but they definitely make it more difficult.
Okay.
The Democratic Party, in all our grandeur and glory, we may have been arrogant in years past. We are having to deal with a two-party system in the legislature. We previously never had to worry about getting 75 votes to pass an appropriation bill. Now we have to do that. Okay. So we have to work more toward compromises, not just with people who are just a little bit less Democratic than we are. We have to work with compromises on people who are actually Republicans. And we always compromised among ourselves, and I always say the Democratic Party is not a party, it's a coalition. Now we actually have a two-party system, and we're having to actually work on things with the other side. And it's making it a little difficult for us, but we're going to work through this. And I think you saw that, for example, in prison reform. Mm-hmm. Prison reform was a major piece of legislation that had 72 co-sponsors in a very polarized House. 21 Republicans signed on as co-sponsors, along with 51 Democrats. That was an issue largely driven by economics, but also has significant impact on progressive politics and how it's going to help people who have found themselves a victim of a system that many would argue is has racial overtones, has racial injustices. But you saw rural and urban, Republican and Democrat, coming together to solve an issue that in many regards was because of budget, but also is going to have a trickle of effect to help people on many social issues as well.
Gotcha. And Senator Elliott.
Well, first I want to say thanks to Jay for reminding me that at times when I felt as if, you know, this was such a lonely thing being labeled as progressive, and to look at that list and know, oh my goodness, we really did these things and nobody died because of it. Nobody died. And for so much of the educational stuff, I remember when I came into the House, I was literally still teaching. And, you know, with my progressive ideas about these things from real practice, and I can tell you what a difference it made when it came to helping shape some of those policies, and so that was great. But my really big reaction to the report is just sitting here thinking about how we really have moved beyond, I think, we lived by the politics of combustion. Because so many things that happened that we look at in the report happened because there was something catastrophic that was facing us. For example, a lot of people think of Lakeview decision as something catastrophic. Turned out to be something that moved us to do what we needed to do for our state. I really get so tired of people, every time I go somewhere out of state, they want to talk about Central High School. You know, that was a combustible thing that happened to us from which we had to learn. And the fact that I think we have learned to move not to form policy by combustion, but by strategy is a really big thing in this state. And I think that is the lesson we need to keep with us as we move into this new era of possible polarization that we see. Because as a Southerner myself, you know, just my background has made it hard for me to be a Southerner, but I have chosen to stay with it despite all the challenges. And so I know there are many, many people like me, and that gives me heart to know that we have chosen to embrace our Southernness. In fact, I have become even more robust in letting people know I am claiming my South. It is mine. I'm laying claim to it. And I think many more people of color really are doing that because you see so many more people moving back to the South. I think that's a great thing. But the other big lesson out of this as well is that I think when you look at that group of people who are working together, we have learned in our state that good fences don't make good neighbors. And we are learning to cross over those fences and knock them down. And I think that's a lesson we need to keep ahead of us as we go forward, because many people need to read Robert Frost's poem a lot more carefully. They will often say good fences make good neighbors and think that's the lesson of the poem. It's not.
Right.
You know, that's the lesson about integration and working together and apple trees and pine trees existing on the same land. This is our land, and what I see as a future in Arkansas is that we have a strategy that we have used before to accomplish all of this, that we must not forget, and we must continue to do so. And if I could say one quick thing about policy, there is no such thing as good policy makers without people who are everyday, hard-working policy makers in their communities holding us accountable and making sure once you vote, you go home and sit down and think we can do it without you. We can't. Because all the good things that happened up here didn't happen just because we were great and all wonderful. We had great support from some great groups and individuals out in our communities, and we shall not forget that lesson. If we do, you know, we'll be right back to this combustible state of doing things by, you know, catastrophic events. And that will not serve us well.
Jay?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add, but I think all three of y'all have hit crucial points, right? And I do think that the gubernatorial leadership piece, Rex, is a big deal, and I do think that this next election is a very, very big deal for the reasons that you articulated. I think Darrin's example of prison reform is a really good example of the kind of traditional coalitional work. And I do think that moving forward, no matter what, in this increasingly partisan environment, it's going to be crucial to look for those opportunities. And finding the opportunities may be a little tougher, but they are still there, and they still are the kind of opportunities in policy change that have ramifications for real people's lives, as you said. And I think that Joyce, of course, said it better than I did in terms of the power of coalitional work. It's real, it matters, it pays off, and it really pays off in the state because of the scale of this place.
Well, let's talk about that a bit. Let's talk about advocacy, organizing, and what may be a threat of what we talked about, polarization. Representative Williams talked about how it will make life a bit more difficult. The message here, more so, although we do want to hear your thoughts on that, but more so tell us what we need to do as average citizens, advocates who are working and toiling, because we still have a long way to go. You know, how do we support, contribute in a positive way to, you know, staving off some of this polarization? Or quite honestly, it may not be staved off, but, you know, what are you telling us we need to do?
Well, Sharice, I'm not sure it's going to be staved off, but I don't think I have to tell many people in this room what advocacy means, because as I look around this room, I see so many people who have my cell number, who call me often, and they know exactly what it means to be an advocate. One of the points of Jay's paper talked about the size of this state and how we know each other. We're a family, and that is really important, and that makes a big difference. One, because you really don't, you know so many people, and you're only, 6 degrees of separation, probably 2 degrees of separation in Arkansas, and you don't want to do anything to hurt someone that you know, or your friend, or your family. But I remember having this great idea, having worked for Mark Pryor in the Attorney General's office and fought with the payday lenders and got that taken care of, and I started thinking about all the other problems for poor people in our state, and I drove through my district, and let me say, District 36, you're in District 36 right now. Welcome to District 36, so I'm proudly to represent and proud to have the Clinton School, but driving down Gower Springs, about this time of the year, tax season, and I saw probably a dozen tax refund anticipation loan advertising. I saw Uncle Sam waving a flag. I saw Statue of Liberty waving a flag. Everybody to come get your rapid refund loan. And so I sent a young college student who was working on my campaign into those places to figure out if they would tell him how much it actually cost. Mm-hmm. And it was unbelievable that it was confusing. He couldn't figure it out. And so I had this idea, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to write a bill. I'm a lawyer. I'm smart. I pulled other statutes together and I drafted it and I wrote it and I thought it was really good. And I thought, well, AARP and Asset Coalition, all these guys ought to get behind me because I'm really bright. Right. So I sent them my legislation, said they're going to love this, and they invited me to come meet with them. And when I left, I had a different piece of legislation, but they made it a much better bill. And they encouraged me to go further than I was willing to go with that bill. But I knew them, I had a history of working with them when I worked in the AG's office, and I knew that they were good at what they had done, and I knew they had adequate research. And so these people know advocacy, and it just is to continue to do what you already do and what you have done, because it really makes a difference. And it's an integral part of the legislative process. Right, it's a very integral part of the legislative process for us.
As we talk about reform, Sharice, I want to mention something that kind of hit me between the eyes just this morning before I came over here as I sat and drank my coffee at home and read the newspapers. One of the things that Jay said is that with all of this that we've accomplished, and it is heartening, Joyce, to look at those stats and see them all in one place, because while you were in the legislature, I was in the governor's office many of those years fighting those same battles. So that's heartening. But Jay did mention, let's not sugarcoat it, there are still extreme social divisions in our state, and many of those revolve around race. And if you will go back home or back to your office and get today's Democrat Gazette, this is what hit me between the eyes this morning, and open to the Voices page. You can get really depressed reading the letters to the editor there sometime. There was a fellow named Cobb from Rogers this morning that wrote a little short letter addressing that most important public policy issue in Arkansas, Dr. Bobbitt, and that is where the Arkansas Razorbacks play home football games. We all know, and he mentioned that, and I'm quoting him almost exactly, that if you go to a game in Little Rock, your chances of being raped, robbed, or mugged are 1,000% greater than if you were to go to one in Fayetteville. Now, we know that's ridiculous, and I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday. I think I know what that man's saying. I really do. But that comes back to my point as we look at reform in the future. It comes back to that strong leadership, because our next governor and our future legislative leaders, we have got to appeal to the best in the Arkansas people instead of appealing to their prejudices and the worst in Arkansas people. And that's whether the next governor's male, female, Democrat, or Republican. That person is going to have to appeal to the best of us, not the worst of us. And we saw the worst of us in that letter this morning.
So I think that I'm on or not on. Okay. I think that this reminds me that we have to call on everyday people like us to challenge dog whistles, because that was nothing more than a dog whistle, and everybody can figure out what that means. And but one of the strategies I've used in the legislature, I think one of the ways perhaps I've survived is, it has served me so well growing up as a Southerner, as an African American, and as a woman, because there are 3 strikes right there. And I could fold up and die and go away, or I could figure out a way to work with the majority culture. And my choice is to figure out a way. And so one of the ways perhaps to think about polarization not getting the best of us is let's search for those things that we know will touch everybody. Something in which everybody has a common interest, or we can, maybe they think they don't. For example, when we worked on that poverty task force for which we produced this report for a strategy going forward, it's a small enough state, and we talked about these relationships. Tell me somebody in this state who doesn't understand what poverty is doing to this state. Right. There is an issue of common ground. I don't care who you are, where you live. You would be in Iraq, even in Northwest Arkansas that's doing relatively well. People, has anybody been to Newton County? Does anybody know what that means? And even in some of the counties where we think there is great prosperity, we have a lot more to do in that regard to move this state forward. And so I think also with the polarization that's out there, we're going to have to think very carefully about what term limits is doing to our state and our ability to move forward. I don't suspect we're going to get rid of term limits, but when you think about it, when people are there such a short time, it's going to be much more difficult to maintain the things that we begin, these very progressive. One of the reasons we've been able to hold on to some of these things and get them started is we've had people there who understand history and know the history. And we are losing so much of that. And just naturally, when you're going to be there a short time, people come in with their short-term agendas, get this done and get out. And we can ill afford to have that to carry on. And I think also, as far as our being so polarized along racial lines, I know this is just something that just gives me the hives. I can't get my mind around it, but it still happens. I've lived it, I know it. But for our state to move forward, we are going to have, I just want to say it right here, we're going to have a whole lot more people of the majority culture stand up and challenge racism. It's right. Not up.
No.
Because I don't care who the minority is. The minority needs to have a big voice. But obviously numbers are not there. And I think very specifically about what's happening now with the DREAM Act. It's inconceivable to me in a state where we've made all this progress that we are not en masse demanding that we pass the DREAM Act so that all kids have a chance to get a college education in this state.
So before, unless you had a comment specifically on polarization, before I open it up to questions from the Assembly, I want to ask or just put on the table something that's pretty obvious to most folks. The progress, rightful reform, the progressiveness, we all celebrate, and that's one of the reasons why we asked Jay to do the report. But when we drive around town, or we drive around our state, and when we look at the 2010 census data, it tells us that we're still not doing well. If we can just have some comments on how we understand that we are ripe for reform, we're just on that version, that crucial turning point that we need to make. But when you talk to the average citizen out there, they're not quite feeling it like we are right now.
Jay made the great point about 6 states. In another way, though, economically, and if you look at those census figures you were just referring to, we are very rapidly becoming 2 states, certainly within a state. If you look at the 2010 census, we had 39 counties that gained population in the previous 10 years. We had 36 counties that lost population in the previous 10 years. Those 39 counties tended to be central, west, northwest, north central. There are exceptions, of course. Craighead County did well, Greene County did well, but generally the 36 that lost tended to be east and south Arkansas. And those divisions are speeding up, actually, in this state, which again comes back to the need for strong statewide leadership to hold us together. And they're very dramatic. I mean, we've been seeing population loss in the Delta since 1950, but it's speeding up now. Monroe County, Brinkley, Clarendon lost 20% of its population in the previous 10 years at a time when Benton County was gaining 45% in population. Pine Bluff has fallen below 50,000 people for the first time since the 1960 census. So again, there are some real trends in this state that are really splitting us apart, which again comes back to the need for strong leadership.
And I think the visible challenges that you described that you can see just driving around are certainly important, but I think it's the invisible stuff, the sense of that there is no hope for change. And that's even more damning in terms of being an obstacle to reform. And that's why community-based organizations become so important, because I think many rank and file Arkansans, especially those who have traditionally been left behind, they've kind of lost hope in the political system. But I think they haven't necessarily lost hope in their local communities. And I think these local community organizations that grow up around the state can be great bridges between rank and file citizens and their institutions of government. And so revitalizing those local community organizations is really important.
Excellent.
And that's a way we can really create change, I think.
And that's a perfect segue into talking about the work that I am proud to be doing right now as Executive Director of the Central Little Rock Promise Neighborhood, because this is an effort in Little Rock that I think everybody, not just in Little Rock, but in the state, could possibly think about. If you're thinking about why Arkansas, I want to say to you now, why the Central Little Rock Promise Neighborhood? Because this is a part of our city that has legacy neighborhoods in it. But has fallen really on very hard times. It's been racked very, very much so by what happened during the gang wars, so to speak. Many people have moved away, and many of us have chosen to live there on purpose to say, yeah, this won't do, we will change this. So that area between Boyle Park and MLK, south of Interstate 30 to Bush Creek Bottoms, that's the Central Little Rock Promise neighborhood. And here's the promise to the folks in that neighborhood, along with very large institutions, our public institutions, UALR, Children's Library, Arkansas Library System, Children's Hospital, UAMS, the city itself, New Futures for Youth, and others. Folks, our public institutions that have made great commitments to those areas to say, as Dr. Ron at UAMS says, we will no longer be an institution that stands here as a long shadow over what we know is wrong. We will get involved, and they're part of trying to change lives in the Central Little Rock Promise neighborhood. And the whole notion is that we get involved in kids' lives. It's about families as well. From age 0 to 24, that will change a generation. But the biggest thing we face, two big things: learning how to not just communicate, but really collaborate, how to really work together. Collaboration is hard work. A lot of people think you just come into a room and that's it, but it's a whole lot more than that. But to get those big institutions to collaborate, and that's part of what I deal with on a daily basis. Everybody has egos and personalities. But the thing that we really are missing and that we need in why the Central Little Rock Promise neighborhood is private funding. The publics have stepped up, but we are in great need of private funding. In fact, we even have a West Little Rock church at this point, we're going to be talking about it later on, not here, that has stepped up and said, we want to be involved in the Central Little Rock Promise neighborhood. And that's a church that ostensibly, geographically, appears to have nothing to do with us. But we can bring ourselves together around learning how to make the changes there. And as small as this state is, that has implications for the entire state, because we're not so big that we can't replicate and model what we learned about the Central Little Rock Promise neighborhood. Go to littlerockpromise.org and learn more.
So we've heard restoring faith, or not restoring, but bridging the nonprofit communities in such a way that because people on the ground have faith in those nonprofit communities, building that capacity, continuing the collaboration with those nonprofit communities to work with folks. And then we heard Rex talk about leadership. So Representative Williams, anything to add to on the ground as people walk and drive around, how we make this progressive change real and palatable so that we do continue to give hope?
Well, real quickly, I wanted to focus really briefly on jobs. I mean, Arkansas is just like the rest of America. We're suffering from a lack of jobs. And when I look around and I think about my friend Jay, and I see my roommate from Hendrix College, Scott Hamilton here, but when you think about the folks who graduated from Hendrix with us, they didn't come back to Arkansas. So many of them left Arkansas looking for better opportunities, better incomes, and that was when jobs were plentiful. Now that they are much much more difficult, and we're in a stressful time. We're making great strides in education. We're making better strides in higher education. We've got to create opportunities for people to be able to live and work here, because it's those folks who will help create this social change.
Right.
But they first got to feed their family. They've got to take care of their homes. And so until we can really continue to bring industry here and create jobs here, we're going to have a hard time. And we've had some success. We've done better than most states, but this is just a difficult time right now for everyone. But we've got to really continue to focus as a legislature. We've got to continue to focus on creating economic opportunities and bringing industry to Arkansas.
So the Maslow hierarchy of needs, so to speak, that once we get folk job and feeling good about employment, they can also turn their attention to the social change that we need to make.
Could I say one quick thing about that now, going into about a minute? During the last legislative session, Representative Frederick Love and I introduced a bill kind of trying to address what Darrin was talking about. You know, we've done economic development in this state kind of one way for a very long time. And this is an interim study that will be starting after the session is over. But what the interim study does really is kind of a follow-up to, an addendum to the report on reducing poverty and creating economic development. But we're asking the Rural Services Agency, the Economic Development Commission, and those economic development, those regional councils, and any other of our agencies or departments to fundamentally rethink the way we are approaching economic development in our state. Because we can't do it continuing to look for, and I'm not saying this is all, the next factory that's going to come here, but to do things at the local level, for example, to think about how are we investing in leadership and investing in building social capital among folks. Let that be a part of our economic development strategy. And how are we looking at growing where we are? And one of the things, I don't know how to do this, but I think it's something that's important. I just don't think there is a place in this state where there are not capabilities, things that are not uncovered, and we tend not to uncover. But I think, for example, if we just pick a place, I don't know, Montrose, Arkansas. I mean, we tend to think, well, maybe there is not a whole lot there. But have we ever bothered to do a talent audit and find out what's there? Have we ever done a dream audit to find out what's there and maybe grow from the people's ideas they have themselves as a matter of economic development rather than coming in and saying, oh, we've got this for you. How about let's do some bubbling up where we are and fundamentally rethink this thing?
Yeah. So what you're saying is it can actually be a step in a social change process too, by talking with folks on the ground in that way.
Absolutely, because we can't do it unless we are growing people along with the process, you know. So I think and that could be one of those coming together, because find somebody who doesn't want their city or town to be better, but we're asking them, you know, to rethink about who's going to be a part of that being better.
Okay. So I have Rex wanting to make a comment.
Real quickly.
I got Skip telling me I need to hush. I got, and I want to make sure that I at least get one or two questions from you guys so that we can end on time.
Real quickly to follow up on that, I spent 4 years with the Delta Regional Authority. We did work in parts of 8 states, not just Arkansas, but one of the things that frustrated me so much, and you mentioned economic development, is that so many of our states were still stuck in that 1950s and 1960s mode of Southern economic development, which was smokestack chasing. I mean, we had a lot of luck in that. We said, you know, come south, we don't have unions, we've got good, hard-working people, which we do. The cost of doing business is less. We had success. Now you drive all over the region and you see where that shoe factory used to be, you see where that shirt factory used to be on the edge of town. Those jobs are long gone. In the knowledge-based economy of the new century, we got to realize that economic development is human development. And one of the most troubling stats to me is that among our adult population in Arkansas, we are next to last in the percentage of adults with college degrees. Only West Virginia rates behind us. We can't even say thank God for Mississippi in that category, folks. Think about that. And we're doing a better job of getting people in college. Now we've got to keep them there and find a way to get them degrees.
Right.
And we've made a lot of progress K through 12 after Lakeview. That's the next step now. We got to keep them in college, and we've got to get them either a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree.
Okay. So I'm going to do a compromise. All right. So I want to do this. Unfortunately, we will not be able to include you all in the conversation because we do have to wrap up. But Rex, I want to get back to the leadership, and if I can have, and it doesn't have to be all four of you, but just talk with us a bit because, again, continuing the progressive social change that we need to make for our state to progress and not be in the bottom 5 indicators of child and family well-being. Talk with us a bit more about where you see leadership, what we need to allow. So in other words, I don't want you to make a prediction, but you actually tossed out there a very strong point around how leadership was key to us getting to where we are right now. And if you just had anything else that you wanted to say about that, and if anyone else wanted to comment, and then from there, I'll do some wrap-up. Mm-hmm.
We touched on term limits here, and I think in the era of term limits, and I'm going to come back to where I started, in the era of term limits, with legislators so limited in the number of years they can spend in the legislature, even though we've got term limits on a governor can serve 8 years, and I think that has strengthened the second floor, as the shorthand out at the Capitol for governors, the second floor. And I think that coming back to this next gubernatorial election, we've had a succession of strong governors, and we need another one because that person can pull his or her party along and can pull people from both parties along toward the kind of reform that we need in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone else want to? Mm-hmm.
Well, I just wanted to say one quick thing, though, about progressives, you know, as somebody who's been labeled one sometimes in a favorable way and sometimes pejorative ways. For the folks who want progressives elected, I really, really challenge you to become passionate about getting out and working to get them elected. Because one of the things that happens that, you know, people go, I'm so glad you're there, I'm so glad you stood up for that. I'm right behind you, and oftentimes you're way too far behind. That's a really serious thing. It is hard to get elected. You know, if you are advocating progressive policies, it's even harder to remain there. And I just want us to remember leadership is not just in one person. It is really, really important that you continue to lead to keep people in office who are progressive.
Excellent. So Jay, if you would start to tell us what we need to do with the report and how we need to use it, and how we can be better advocates for not just celebrating where we've come, but even advocating for where we need to get to.
Well, I think one, we need to get over our inferiority complex as a state.
Mm-hmm.
We can create change here. We have created change here, and I think that's crucial, point one. I think we do need to invest both in terms of person power and financially in these community organizations that can begin to build these bridges and reinvigorate local communities and get people reignited about social change at the rank and file level. And then, unfortunately, we need some resources from outside the state. I mean, I think that it's undeniable that this is not going to happen just within the borders of the state. This is a poor state. It's poor in terms of people's wealth, but also in terms of foundational wealth. And we've got to have some help from outside if we're going to create this change and then be a model for other places.
Okay. Rex, in terms of communication, any thoughts on how we disseminate the study?
When Jay mentions getting help from out of state, first of all, we are blessed with great in-state foundations. The work that you all do at Rockefeller, I see my good friend, former State Senator John Brown here. His foundation does so much for us at independent colleges and universities. But the big out-of-state foundations, others from out of state, one problem, and Jay, I think you've hit on this some, that we've had as a state is we're kind of hidden in plain sight. You know, we're not, people can't figure us out. We're not really wholly Southern. We're certainly not wholly Midwestern. We're not wholly Southwestern. We're a little bit of both. And when I worked in the Delta, I'd get frustrated because there was kind of, in a weird way, a sexiness about the Mississippi Delta, even though the Arkansas Delta is bigger in land size than the Mississippi Delta is. And then, of course, you have Texas, which used to be its own country, and we know how Texans are. And you got Louisiana and the focus on New Orleans, rightfully so, after Katrina. But we've been kind of lost in that national picture. And I think one of the things that reports like this can do is communicate, if you want to invest, we're small. We're fewer than 3 million people. We tend to get along. We tend to know each other. You can see some quick results here. And B, we've already been pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, by some of what you saw Jay put up there, and that you can help take us to the next level. You can have an effect here greater and more quickly than you can in virtually any other state in the country.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And Senator Elliott or Representative Williams, in terms of the legislator and adding the public discourse of public policy, uses for the study?
Well, obviously, I think this is a great study, Jay, and thank you for doing this. And hopefully we'll make it available to all of the members of the General Assembly, because I think the one point that you just made, that we need to get over our inferiority complex, is very important for us in the legislature as well. One thing about how we really make change, and to Rex's point about our size, while investments in Arkansas have exponential effect and they multiply quite quickly, I think we're seeing in the legislature, we're seeing outside national organizations that don't necessarily always share Arkansas's values also investing in Arkansas, and they also have the same ability to quickly make strides and gains. So we've got to be careful that we make sure that we embrace those things that are true to Arkansas's values, because we're seeing a number of traditional national proposals coming to our state, creating legislation that's modeled after states that don't look like Arkansas, don't act like Arkansas, and may not share our values. And they're able to come here, and because we are small, we have a relatively inexpensive media market. We're sometimes grab a hold of issues and ideas that may not really be true Arkansas values, and we have to be really careful that we don't fall victim to that. So we've got to protect our true Arkansas identity and be careful not to allow that to be taken by someone else, because it is a small state, and we also
Excellent.
can be overtaken quickly.
Excellent, excellent. Well, with that, I want to thank the panel. Thank you so much. And I want to do a couple things before we say goodbye. One is that we heard from the panel how we can use the study to further conversations about Arkansas, why invest, how to spark hopefulness and celebrate success in what we have done thus far. We also heard that it can be used for public discourse, public policy, for that conversation, and that it needs to be disseminated widely for reasons of talking about not just what we've done, but also what we need to do. So I want to say that the study, copies of the report are available at the table at the exit, and at the exit this way, thank you, at the exit, and also that you can get the study, for those who want to be green, at arpanel.org. That's arpanel.org. While I'm sure AARP has lots of nice studies, you won't find this study there. So arpanel.org for those who want to be green, but also it helps in dissemination to send the link. So tweet, Facebook, and the like. And then my final comment is that this lecture is also a part of a funders tour that we're doing here. And I'm not going to ask my funder colleagues to stand up in fear that they may be bombarded. But I want to acknowledge that we have funders from Toledo, Ohio, New York, North Carolina, Michigan, and other places around the country that have come to Arkansas because we want them to be ambassadors, advocates, and activists for the state of Arkansas, and this lecture is a part of that tour. So again, they're going to remain anonymous, but if we can just welcome our guests and thank them for their interest.